Hey, it's Zoë Routh, and welcome to 2025 and another episode of The Future of Leadership. I am thrilled to be here with you at the start of this brand new year. And there's so much exciting stuff to come in the show, and I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for listening. All right, my question for you this week is, how much failure can you handle? Chances are it's more than you think. And that's certainly what my guest has experienced and has to share with us. So let's get into it. On Planet Human today, I'm putting on my glasses so I can read my writing because it's very technical research. We have a breakthrough in agriculture using Electro Agriculture. It's called Electro Ag. It sounds very cool. It's using solar panels to trigger a chemical reaction with where it turns ambient CO2 into an energy source for plants. And the energy source is acetate, replacing potentially photosynthesis. So why should you care about this? Well, I've been thinking about one of the biggest consumers of energy when you're trying to grow plants in a contained environment is electricity or sunlight or artificial light. And I was watching a science fiction show on one of the subscribing channels where it's called Silo. It's based on the books by Hugh Howey. It's an amazing series of books and an amazing show. And they live in the silo and they grow their own food in there. I thought, where's the sunlight? They can't really get any sunlight there. It's all artificial light. And if you could reduce the amount of sunlight or electronic light that you need to grow food, this will put less pressure on energy consumption. So the breakthrough is it can happen. There's about a 4% increase in productivity around this. Now, there's a lot of research to go into this, but it's really helpful when we're thinking about long haul flights, say to Mars. We're going to be in a spaceship for months and space is at a premium. This could reduce the fuel requirements, the energy requirements, and also the space involved if we can genetically modify plants to use acetate as a fuel, as opposed to photosynthesis, or more of acetate and less of photosynthesis. Amazing. Cool, huh? Well, that's Planet Human. On Planet Zoë, I am pre-recording this because I should be skiing in Japan. So our annual pilgrimage to Japan, where we can enjoy the spectacular views and the amazing adventures of skiing, is happening right now. Yay. That's me. That's all I'm doing, skiing. What if and how might we? What if we could live based on compassion? What if we led with compassion at the heart of our approach? And my guest today really showcases how he does that. And I was thinking about this on a day-to-day basis. I drop Rob off every day at this little spot beside an old abandoned building. And he walks down into town and into his office from there. And every time we stop, this old abandoned building, it's been boarded up. Yep, there's one little entrance. And at the entrance, there is broken bottles, discarded garments, trash, essentially. And we know that there's people living in there. And every time I'm struck by how is it that humans that were given birth to and raised and became adults end up living in an abandoned building like that? What is the story of their trajectory? And I know from the work that I've done with different agencies is that they could be any one of us. It can have a series of unfortunate elements or incidents in their lives. They end up homeless and living in places like that. Some of us end up having mental health issues that can drive some of that. And some of it is just misfortune or a combination of both. So what if we live with compassion? And I think the solution, it's not really a solution. I think it's a tending that we need to do. We need to have the first aid response, the compassionate response of just giving that human some care and love and support. And then we need to do the systemic work of changing of how we look after people, how we support them. What is the safety network to provide an entire ecosystem to help elevate them into safe, protected life so they can thrive as best they are able in a secure, safe environment. These things are not easy. And at 8 a.m. every morning, I'm challenged by this. So what does a compassionate response look like? When you see a human, be human with them, give them eye contact, say hello, give whatever you can to support them. And at the same time, if you can, support the agencies that are doing systemic work to try and change a larger ecosystem to support them. So, how might we live with compassion? Let's find out how my guest does it. It's tea time in the office kitchen, tea talk. And my guest today is John Graham. What a privilege it was to interview him and have a conversation about his experiences. He is the author and founder of Good Samaritan Home. And I won't steal his thunder because it's an extraordinary tale. He is really a believer in second chances, and he's an inspiring human who leads with compassion. Without further ado, here is John Graham. Well, all the way from Western Ohio for tea time in the office kitchen, we have John Graham. Welcome to the show.
I'm very glad to be here. It's it's the first time I've had a conversation with somebody from so far away.
I wish it didn't feel so far away some days. Some days it feels very close. And I'm grateful for you to have you on the show because when I read your profile, I was immediately intrigued. You've had an epic, huge life. You've been through a lot, you've accomplished a lot, and you continue to contribute. And I'm excited to hear about all of that. So, one of the things that was flagged in your PR material is that you've gone from homeless to business owner. Tell me about that. that sounds extraordinary.
That is an interesting story. And in some respects, I look back on it and say, I wish I had done that in a much less time so I'd have more time for this end of the journey. But I graduated college with a degree in psychology, but I had no structured background. So when I had this degree and no direction and really nothing to do with it, and this was in the late 60s, and there was a great deal of confusion politically, sociologically, emotionally for all of us. We tend to forget, but the closest thing to 1968 is probably January 6th of 2000, was that 21, when there was violence in the streets and the ensuing name calling, the political unrest, the instability. That's very similar to what we went through. At one point, I was even at Kent State on the day of the shootings. Even though I didn't get involved in the protest, I was involved in another protest at Ohio State that same day. And the guard was around us and they had guns on us. And it was a scary time. And so I graduated college with really no direction and ended up living in my truck. I had gone through a series of jobs. I was a building contractor, a children's home counselor. I was a fireman, even a journalist. And at one point, I even tried being a minister until I realized that being a minister requires a certain degree of civilization. And I wasn't that good at it.
Being civilized.
Being civilized. I'm not that good at being civilized. And you'll see why in a minute. But I met my wife and I was living in my truck and it was about to be repossessed. And so she literally rescued me from homelessness and said, now you're going to get a job. So that's one of the times I ended up driving a truck. But being married and having a family didn't necessarily bring stability. And for the next several years, I was barely just going from job to job, state to state, until at 53, my wife and I decided that we need to do something more with our lives than just exist. And we said, what about those who have been through what we've been through? Can we help people who are even more desperate than us? So we found an old house, the oldest house, the cheapest house in town, and started renovating it to use it as a homeless shelter. And we then brought in people who were literally on the street. And the Department of Correction asked us if we could take people coming from prison who were homeless. And one thing led to another. And they eventually said, we would like to do more of this. So we added another house with the few dollars we had left. So we had two houses, and the Department of Correction was paying us a per diem now. So that was my first income as a head of the Good Samaritan Home, is what we started calling our nonprofit. And one thing led to another. And that home in 2001 burgeoned to now 19 homes. And we have 10 staff and an annual budget of $2 million.
Oh my God.
And but the best part, that's the business end of it. We have been able to help house and mentor and hopefully help keep people out of prison, more than 2,500 men and women over the past 22 years. So I'm most pleased with that.
That's really quite every aspect of your story is amazing. I mean, the fact that you were had a psychology degree and then ended up churning through job after job after job and really kind of getting by on the skin by the skin of your teeth to have a lovely wife peg you down and demand a little bit more structure and yet still live vicariously until the age of 53. It's still quite a long time living, just surviving. And then the pivotal decision, can we help other people who are worse off than us? That's actually quite a profound moment. And it takes a lot of courage to look down the ladder as opposed to looking up the ladder as to where we could go. What made you think about the people who are worse off than you at that point?
Well, to be candid, and I I was a minister at the time, and people would come to my door, and they would ask for help. And you see them in front of Walmart, you see them on corners, and I just didn't know what to do. And unfortunately, many people in my church said, "You're in the church house. We don't want those people to be in our house." So that was part of the reason I didn't fit in with the civilized members of the church. And I realized that, you scratch the veneer. If you lose a job, or the economy has greatly diminished in Ohio because of the auto industry. Mm. And so people who were working class, like my father was a working class mill worker, and those mill jobs are gone. They're all gone. Pittsburgh has had to change. That's where I grew up, has to change from being an industrial middle class to be some sort of high tech class for the educated elite. And all of those people who were mill workers, like my father, had to find other work. And so they ended up homeless in many cases. So I never forgot that. And when I look around at the people who, but for the grace of God, I would be on that street corner today, and probably the grace of my wife, because when we were first dating, all her friends said, "Don't go out with him. Don't date him." And then when we decided to get married, her pastor refused to marry us.
What?
Yes, refused to marry us. And he's a good man. And the truth is, he was probably right, because I wouldn't have married me to her either, because I had nothing to offer. But she saw in something. Well, I like to say that two of us had our limp, and we came together to lean on one another. And together we could walk straight. So together we had this shared vision of helping other people who are struggling like us, just more obviously. And that's and be quite candid, Zoe. When I feel like I can help somebody who's even something so basic as a roof over your head, I feel like my day has more meaning, because I've had people come to me with frostbite on their feet because it's been 0 degrees and they have literally nowhere to go. And, I can't in clear conscience just ignore that. I just can't.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, the brush with poverty and homelessness made you more aware of how easily we can all slip into that place of desperation. And that has gifted you a modicum of compassion, along with the support of your wife, who gave you the gift of seeing the good in you. So those two things combined allow you to look at people who others, supposedly charitable Christians, would dismiss, and open up your heart and home to them. What do you think stops people from, or what do you think makes people go, "I don't bring those people over here"? Is it lack of experience like you've had, or is it something else?
I think it's a combination of many things because Chris Christopherson had a song about something the words affect. Everybody needs somebody to look down on. And I think we like to say, at least my life is better than his. And that might be at the core of all our ethnic divides, our racial divides, because we like to blame somebody as the eternal other. And those people, I remember back in 1958 when drugs were an issue in the cities like Detroit or New York, and the caseworkers, the drug counselors would come to the suburbs, say that you too will have to deal with heroin. And the suburbs said, no way, those are those people. And what they meant was other colors. But those same issues are in our suburbs and in all small towns in Ohio. We deal with heroin, we deal with meth, we deal with fentanyl, just like the big cities. And it is a white issue, it's a brown issue, it's an us issue. And I would say probably 60 to 80% of what I deal with is addictions on some level. That leads to crimes. And some of the addictions are middle class prescription addictions. And that's what the oxys have done. They've created a whole class, particularly in the professional field. We saw that recently with Matthew Perry, who was addicted, and eventually it killed him. And he was probably one of the brightest stars in Hollywood.
So it's a complex social issue. Coming back to setting up the Good Samaritan house or houses, when you first decided to invite people to come in and to set this up as a structured program, did you have visions that it could go as large as it has done?
Oh, no, not at all. The house had to be remodeled, and I had some construction background, and that took, I promised my wife I'd do it in 3 months, but it took 14 years.
Oh my
so
God.
That tells you. You can see some of the woodwork behind you because it's a 140-year-old house that I tended to be rather neurotic about repairing. But I thought if we can just do one little place, but being fair, having strangers in my house was not a good start, but it was the only start we could do. That's why when my wife got a little inheritance when her parents passed, she opted to use that inheritance so we could buy a separate building as a shelter. And that's when we started to expand and grow. But to be honest, we had a lot of blowback from the community because of this same attitude we were talking about earlier. Why are you bringing those people into our community?
Yeah.
And there were petitions, there were council meetings, there were ordinances passed, there were threats. I had police protection at one point at a meeting. I had a man stab me in front of the courthouse. It was a superficial wound, but he made his point. But particularly what concerned me was people wrote to the editor of the newspaper and said they were willing to pay for his bail so that he could finish the job.
Oh my God.
That's the fear. That's why I compare it to today's political climate. Fear of the eternal other, fear of those people who don't look like me. And all immigrants must be bad. All people in prison have to be so bad they should stay there forever. And I have found that many of the people I deal with are simply the product of their families. They're the product of things that I went through, but on much greater degree. Mothers and fathers who simply weren't there, or drug addictions in their own family. Common thread where grandma has raised the children, and far beyond anything I can imagine. But I have found that if given the opportunity, people want to change. They simply don't know how. So what I try to do is just offer an option, offer a way. I can't make you change. I can't make you get a job. I can just offer you an opportunity to get a job. And if you get a job, then maybe the next step is that you'll keep that job and get your own apartment. And then maybe if you're stable enough, you'll stay out of jail. And we found that to be true. The data is very clear on that.
That's good. I was going to ask you what your success rate is because having talked to other professionals who do similar work, it's such a complex issue helping somebody restart, have a second chance. It's not just one thing. It's a whole ecosystem of support that needs to be around that person to help deal with their addiction, to help deal with the lack of life skills often, or the lack of education, or there's so much lack in that human's life. To try and rebuild it sometimes can be massive. So tell me a little bit more about the data and success rates of the people who've come through Good Samaritan House.
Well, statistically, the Department of Correction uses 3 years as the recidivism baseline. Have you stayed out of prison for 3? We keep them for 6 months or to a year, sometimes two, and we don't track their recidivism. What we track is how well they did with us.
Mm-hmm.
And so, let's suppose you're with us, and what I can look at is, do you keep your corner of your house clean?
Mm-hmm.
Do you come in at curfew? Do you appear to be trying to make it to get a job? Are you doing your best at being a good housemate? We, I like to say that most of our residents are riding short ponies, so we have to shoot real low. And sometimes a made bed is the best thing I can get out of a guy
Mm.
because he's never made a bed before.
Mm.
So in the morning, he makes that bed, goes out, gets rejected for 6 jobs, 7 jobs, 8 jobs. But at the end of the day, he comes home, he sees he did something right. And last week, we had 7 fellows in our house who had gone through a county reentry class on how to get a job. And they graduated after 8 weeks, and they were wore donated suits, and they had a certificate. And the county commissioner was there at the ceremony, and even a federal judge who was the chairman of the program. And they were so proud holding up their certificates that said, I graduated. And many of them had never graduated from high school or even junior high school. This was the only time they'd ever worn a suit. And what I learned from that is that was an extremely important moment for them.
Mm.
Now, the next step is to go take that certificate and then go out and get rejected 4 more times or 5 more times. But now they can look at that certificate and say, I know I can do it. That to me is a success. They finished the class.
Mm. Often
Now,
it's those little micro achievements that we need to build on. As you said, riding a low pony. I like that expression.
yeah,
So, it's maybe you can get to a larger pony, but maybe even just getting on the pony is the starting point. And yeah,
it's actually a form of behaviorism. It's
yeah,
looking for steps in the right direction. I'm not looking
right.
for perfection, but
Yeah.
are you at least turning in the right direction? Did you take a step? And now, and also with addictions, statistically, it can take 6 or 7 rehab tries to overcome your addiction.
Yeah.
So, how much more so to overcome your lifestyle addiction to failure? So, if somebody gets a job and quits, or gets a job and doesn't go to work and gets fired, okay, get up, do it again. I've been through that. I understand what it's like to fail. So, I don't focus in on the failure. What I try to focus in on, are you willing to try one more time?
I think, yeah, and that's not easy. And it's very much a learned practice. And you've definitely applied that practice into something else that you've done recently ish to write a novel. And I love this part of the brief, which seems like, okay, you've opened up your home, you've set up this Good Samaritan house. It's grown exponentially to now having 19 homes across Ohio. You're making a difference in thousands of people's lives. You wrote a novel. Why? What's it about?
Well, when I was going to the council meetings to defend our program, I had reams of data. I could show that, and my doctoral thesis was actually showing the positive impact of rehabilitation and reentry on the community, but nobody listens.
Mm-hmm.
So what I determined was, how can I present the story of second chances in a way that people will read it?
Mm-hmm.
How can I present a Shakespearean play like Romeo and Juliet to make it enjoyable in the form of Titanic? And that's true, by the way.
Yeah.
Romeo and Juliet on a
Yeah, it
boat.
is. Yeah.
So what I tried to do was I took this whole idea of second chances and created a fictional character called Daniel Robinson, who think of Forrest Gump going through the 60s. And he came from this background where he was in suffering or in ostracism, and he didn't have the family structure. He came from abuse. He came from neglect. His pastor abused him at one point, and he ran away and traveled through the 1960s looking to create a new family in San Francisco at Haight-Ashbury, at Kent State, in Detroit with the racial issues. He traveled trying to find forgiveness and love until he met Kate. And with Kate, together they came and they could lean on one another. And the two of them tried to now reach out and help somebody else. And it paralleled a lot of our work. But the idea is that Daniel was able to be, Daniel was an everyman. He's like you and I, but he struggled as much as Charles, who was the character who came from prison that Daniel tried to help. Charles, in turn, was actually more of a teacher about forgiveness than Daniel was the teacher to Charles. So Daniel, who had 3 degrees at the time, was taught by a man with a 4th grade education who spent 20 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. And he learned how to forgive his oppressors. And it took him a lifetime. But with Charles, which the turning the tide like that, and at the end of the story, like all things in life, there's always this tragic element, because life is never a Prince Charming, happy ever after. So I like to, and what I've done with that, we published it. By the way, it was rejected 200 times by publishers. 200 times.
I don't know how you persisted 200 times. I mean, yeah, that's a lot.
What I did,
one
I kept
rejection,
editing.
2 rejections, 200. Oh my God.
I just kept editing. I thought after the first draft it was ready, but eventually I hired a professional editor, and we went through it again and again and again. And the end product is what I believe to be a very easy and emotional story, a page turner. And since it was published in December, we've garnered 25 awards, including the Story Trade Book of the Year.
Oh my God.
And I'm very pleased. But what I'm most excited about are the readers who have come back and said, that was me. I felt Daniel's story. I turned every page. I had a man at 91 stay up till 3 a.m. because he couldn't close the book.
Oh my God.
Now, that to me is why I spent 10 years writing it. And the end result was that now we have people who are reading about second chances, and they're not reading about data. They're reading about Daniel Robinson. They're reading about me and you.
What is the name of your beautiful book?
It's called Running as Fast as I Can. And the idea is that there are some of us who are born behind because of birth or circumstance, and we can't catch up to normal people. We're running as fast as we can, but it's never fast enough. And the idea is just keep running. Just keep running.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Now, John, are you ready for the Fast 3?
Oh, I'll try.
Okay. What's the future technology you most want right now?
Well, what we're doing now, I had learned to speak Facebook and Instagram, and God forbid TikTok. I've learned that I try to speak in long explanations, but to communicate well, I have to speak very quickly and very visually. So I desperately need to learn how to work with things like this podcast or with social media if I want to communicate effectively to people who need to hear this story. And that's one of the reasons we went to an audiobook, because it's where the people are.
Okay. So the future tech you want right now is to be able to speak succinctly and quickly?
Yes. Editing is not my best trait. I have to work hard at it.
Okay. Wonderful.
You'll notice that.
Number two, what's your best tip you ever got for leadership?
The best tip is that business, like life, is not a sprint. You don't simply go out, get an idea in Silicon Valley, and suddenly people throw money at you and you make $10 billion. It rarely works that way. Even Amazon spent years and years and years not making a single dime. Life, like business, is a marathon that we have to just keep running the long game. And the truth is that there'll be a lot of mistakes. In a marathon, you fall down, but you get up and you try again. So I would say I have learned that rejection is normal, but don't quit running. Keep trying.
Okay, that's great. And number three is what are you reading or listening to right now?
I've actually been doing a lot of work with documentaries. Every once in a while, I'll go back and I'll listen to Dr. King's speeches. Last night, we were watching the biography on John Lewis because John Lewis was a civil rights worker in the 50s and 60s, and ultimately he became a congressman. And even 40 years after he was a civil rights worker, there were people in Congress who wouldn't speak to him because he represented that racial divide that they were trying to continue. And he was looking for reparations. He was looking for reconciliation. And John Lewis said, I always refer to my critics as brother because I won't respond in kind. And again, today, it is so easy to name call. And I would say that we need to steep ourselves in what I feel we've lost the theological roots of our political conflict. Dr. King was a theologian who expressed himself politically in the town square. And I think I would like to see that revived again. And the church can have a very important function in that. So I've been I spend a lot of my time trying to read about people in that vein who have been before me and have gone through conflict, like Dr. King, Nelson Mandela, and such. Because it's in the conflict that I think we think most clearly, we can see most clearly.
Wow, that's pretty profound statement. It's in the conflict that we can see most clearly. Can you explain that a little bit more, please?
Uh, let me give a theological example. When the church was oppressed early on in its beginning, the church was noted for how it treated the weakest among them. The saying the Romans had was they noted that the Christians loved one another. But then after Christianity was made the norm and then became the only church in Rome, it became the Roman government. And that led to becoming exactly the persecutor that Rome had been. Mm. And we see that with every time the church had a difference of opinion, they would not only persecute one another, they would war with one another. The Spence as trying to politically change the world when we should be doing it through our acts of kindness and our acts of mercy. So when I was going through the conflict for 7 years, I found that walking down the street, I was constantly aware of the animosity, and my mind was always, always focused in on how can I respond so that I don't get onto that same level.
Okay.
And it kept me very, very sharp in my faith.
I love it. So don't go from victim to persecutor.
Which is common. And being quite candid, what Stokely Carmichael did with the civil rights movement in 1966, he says, we want Black power now. We don't want this nonviolence. We want our turn. Mm. And that was, from my perspective, the beginning of the end of the true civil rights movement. And now we have that same animosity with Black Lives Matter fighting against White Lives Matter and that sort of nonsense. If we could just see that all of us are really the same color underneath.
Thank you. So that was the fast-ish 3.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I need an editor desperately. But
no, I asked that follow-up question, which is quite a big, profound one. And when we're talking like power games like this, it's quite complex issues. There's lots of high emotion that drives people to want to take back power or to reclaim it. And people like to hang on to power. They don't like losing it. They don't like sharing it, because sharing power feels like loss. And that's why we see people hanging on or to the status quo or lamenting the lost status quo, because they feel like they have lost instead of gained in the new paradigm. And it drives a lot of conflict. All right. I have one last question before we wrap up is, what's your best tip for leaders when it comes to embarking on new projects, whether it's an enormous one, like setting up Good Samaritan House, or actually writing a novel is quite a big project as well, or changing practices in the workplace. What are your best tips for leaders?
What I work with heavily with my staff is because we come into a situation where people are on parole, they're under supervision. We have so much power. We can literally tell somebody they have to leave in the middle of the night for misbehavior, and they might die on the street. And I tell myself, because you have power, doesn't mean you have to exercise that power. Sometimes your greatest power is in showing mercy. So what I've been working for really for 15 years with my staff is how can we find a way to keep that fellow here, even though he doesn't respond? How do we show him not our authority, but how can we show him our mercy? So because I feel that mercy has far more power because it gives you control over the entire situation. So I look for leaders to be able to not just take charge and tell people what to do, but to encourage and draw people. And when they fail, to forgive and to say, let me teach you how to do that again. My one saying I use all the time is that life, like business, is often written in pencil. We get do-overs. We will make mistakes, but you can do it again. And we have people who have lived their lives making mistakes. I've made mistakes. So the least I can do is offer you a second chance too.
I love that. That's a beautiful, beautiful message, big-hearted message to give us hope and inspiration that our fellow humans can look after each other, and to drop a bit of kindness where it'd be very much a lot easier to drop a bit of authority. John, this has been extraordinary. I've really appreciated you sharing your story and having that initial courage to do something against the grain, to uphold the humanity of your fellow human, to show kindness where there's cruelty, to offer shelter where there was none before. And it's made a difference to the lives of the people that you've touched, and your stories in your novel and in the podcasting that you do will hopefully kindle inspiration for all of us that we can do just a little bit better for each other. So thank you so much, Don. I really appreciate it.
And may I say that maybe when all things are said, maybe the church does best when we're uncivilized.
Maybe we can find our way through all the uncivilization to find a better civilization.
That's right, because amidst all the chaos, we can bring a degree of mercy, and then hope. We bring hope. That's what we try to bring.
Thank you.
Thank you. I very much appreciate being with you on a Tuesday, which is to me still a Monday.
Read to lead. And I have John Graham's book, Running as Fast as I Can, as a recommendation. The story about how this book has come to be is as inspiring as the content. The fact that John worked at the script, never giving up until he improved it and improved and improved, and it got accepted by a publisher, is remarkable. And now it's won heaps of awards. The story about this is a man who's trying to survive childhood abuse and intergenerational trauma, how you get to a place of forgiveness and hope and redemption. Very inspiring story. So that is Running as Fast as I Can, if you want a boost to your heart and head at this time. Running as fast as I can. That's it from the show this week. If you enjoyed it, please share with others, subscribe in your app, or become a podcast insider to get all the bonus extras like an implementation checklist, water cooler factoids to make you look smart at your random gatherings. You can just plop those things into conversation and inspire others. And just because you're cool. That's what you can do. Become a podcast insider. So go to zoerouth.com, click on podcasts, and that's where you can sign up to get all the bonus extra goodies. In the meantime, live with grace, lead in service, live well, lead well.